History happened everywhere. A random country and a random time with a topic pulled from the hat. Then a week for one of us to dive into the internet to find out all that we can. Welcome to History Happened Everywhere. Hi, I'm Ryan, and with me in the studio is my co-star of History Happened Everywhere. It's Mr. Peter Goddard.
Hello, everybody, fans and non-fans alike.
Peter, it's been a week since we've heard from you.
It has, and in that week, like the beaver's tooth, my knowledge has been continually growing.
I know what you mean there. That's go on, so where did you get that from?
I have wedged that little fact in thanks to it being provided after our Sweden podcast from young Sydney Waples, who's 9 years old, wanted us to know that beaver's teeth continually grow. So now you know too.
Fun fact. Thanks, Sydney.
Okay, so yes, this week it's been a real entertaining and surprisingly fun journey into the country for this week.
I think I can remember it, but why don't we remind ourselves collectively? Yeah, let's roll back the days and find out what it was that you got out of the hat that we're going to be talking about today.
Prepare the desolator.
She is ready for our randomization.
Prime the pump. Please tell me my country.
Country is Kiribati.
What now? And that's definitely a country.
It is. Okay, what do you want to know next?
I really want to know a time period that is, please be quite recent, because it sounds challenging.
All right, time period is 1980 to 1985.
Yes, I think that's a recovery.
Okay, so do you want to know the topic?
I do want to know the topic.
And your topic is body and mind.
Ooh, oh, that's good.
Okay, so you have got Kiribati, 1980 to 1985, and with a theme of body and mind. Interpret that as you wish. So, Kiribati. Where is Kiribati? You got to tell me, because I've been waiting. I've been itching to find out.
I know, but I'm not going to start with that, Ryan. I'm going to start with the fact that it is not called Kiribati.
Ooh.
So this country is spelled Kiribati, but in the local language, TI is pronounced S. So in fact, it's called Kiribati.
Kiribati.
But we were completely wrong in how we pronounced that when we found out about it.
I mean, given that we'd never heard of it or seen the word before.
It's a fair mistake to make.
It is a fair mistake. So,
but yes, it's called Kiribati.
That's going to be hard to get my head around.
Yes, it took me quite a long time every time I looked at my notes and it said Kiribati.
Yeah.
My brain could not really handle it.
Every now and then we get a country, don't we? Niue, Niue. We weren't sure how it was pronounced. Guyana and Guyana.
Yep.
We're learning stuff, mate.
What I kind of want to know is, they didn't always write in Roman letters in Kiribati.
Right.
So at some point they adopted this writing system.
Mm-hmm. And
who made that decision when there was a perfectly functional S in the alphabet to go, let's go with the TI. That's really going to stump them.
All right, so tell me about Kiribati.
Okay, so it is the Republic of Kiribati.
Of course, they're all republics. I think we should just have that as standard now for most country names.
Yeah, there's some kingdoms still out there, so I think it's worth reflecting on.
Of course.
And it is a chain of atolls. Do you know what an atoll is?
No.
It's sort of kind of an island, but it's a ring-shaped coral reef or island that surrounds a lagoon. So it's kind of a little ring of land around a lagoon. And essentially what it is, in this case, is a submerged volcano. It's the tip of a submerged volcano. So you've got the crater essentially around, which is the lagoon, and the lip of the volcano is the landmass.
Wow. Okay. So a long time ago, there was a volcano that erupted, and then water poured in?
Yeah, I guess they're low-lying volcanoes in the sea, so they erode down over time as well. And they become land. So this is in Micronesia, which is, you've probably heard of Polynesia.
I have.
But that kind of Pacific area is not partitioned into, but it's got Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia are kind of the regions down there.
Right, okay.
I knew Polynesia. I'd not really been aware of Micronesia and Melanesia, but they are things.
Okay.
It's in the Central Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
So in terms of where it is, if you open your mental map,
Yep.
and you have the United States, you can see that. And then if you go left from the United States, you'll eventually get to Japan.
For those people that are using a map, Pete means west.
Yes, west in normal people language.
Yes.
And in the middle of those two places, which are a very long, long way apart, is an enormous amount of what looks on the world map to be empty blue space.
Yeah.
Now, smack in the middle of all that is a selection of islands, one of which, or a selection of which, are our country, Kiribati.
Kiribati.
So it's actually kind of, for those who know where Hawaii is, which is also kind of in the middle of all this, down and to the left or south and to the west of Hawaii.
Down and to the left.
By
like
some distance.
JFK.
But when you look at the map, it just looks pretty empty, but these small islands, there are a number of small islands all around that zone.
Mm-hmm. Down and to the left. Down and to the left.
Exactly. So I'm going to surprise you now. Technically, I would call it the corner of the world, as far as the sphere can have a corner.
Yeah, this is you telling me that you believe in flat Earth.
Not quite, no. Kiribati is particularly unique in that it straddles the equator. So you can find Kiribati, it's a selection of islands, so obviously it's kind of spread out, like a little like the Indonesia that we looked at and some other places. So you can find bits of Kiribati north of the equator and south of the equator. So it's in two hemispheres, but it also straddles the 180-degree meridian, which means it's also in both the eastern and western hemispheres. So
oh, wow, okay.
it is, I think, the only country in the world that is in all four hemispheres of the globe.
That's amazing. How cool is that?
So then, just to add to the amazingness of this place, which I have to be honest, when I started this, I thought, oh, small island in the Pacific, there's not going to be much.
Yeah.
This place is a goldmine of quirky, fascinating things.
Okay.
Also on approximately the 180-degree meridian is the International Dateline.
Okay.
So are you aware of the International Dateline? Let's start with that.
Is that like Greenwich Mean Time and all the...
It's literally the continuation of the same line. So Greenwich Meridian is what we would consider to be, it's arbitrary, but there's 0 o'clock of any given time zone. And that line goes all the way around the world.
Yep.
And the other side of the world, that same line is the 180-degree meridian. And so the International Dateline, when you cross it, you change days.
Okay.
So you're accustomed to the idea of if we go to France, they are 1 hour ahead.
Yeah. Or in America, if you travel across from East Coast to West Coast, 4 hours or whatever.
Exactly. So if you think of it this way, and it took me a while to get my head around this, so bear with me, listeners.
Sure.
You start, let's say it's noon on Saturday in London at the 0 point.
Yeah.
If you start traveling east, you will start going -1 hour, -2 hours, -3 hours, -4 hours.
Yeah.
And if you start going west, you start going +1 hour, +2 hours, +3 hours. And if you keep going in those two directions, you will eventually come together again on the other side of the world.
Okay.
But of course, one of you has been going forwards in time.
Oh,
and the other one's been going backwards in time. So to bring it all together, there's an international dateline, which when you cross it, it is immediately pretty much the next day.
I'd never even thought of that, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. Because we look at a map laid out flat. You don't think of it necessarily as a sphere when you're thinking about time zones.
Exactly. So this country is also sitting, or it was also sitting until about 1995, smack on the international dateline.
Yeah.
So, well, not smack on, it was straddled it again. So the east of the country and the west of the country were on different days.
Different days. So, okay. So if I'm traveling east and it's a Tuesday when I arrive in Kiribati,
and you head off to a business meeting on the other side of the country.
Yeah. It becomes Wednesday?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, man.
Right?
How on earth do they manage all that? Do they just not bother, right?
Well, this is a problem,
bother
right?
Either.
Because,
no,
of course,
just days don't exist. You just would be like, I'm on a lovely little tropical island. What do I care?
Well, I mean, I think historically that was certainly the attitude, because it's all of this is an artificial convention, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ultimately. But it was quite inconvenient in later periods when you were trying to do business with someone and your Monday to Friday was not other people's in other parts of the country's Monday to Friday.
Getting lots of business calls on a Saturday morning.
Right. So,
hey, no, I'm on the other side of the island.
So in, I think, 1995 it was, the Kiribati people thought this is highly inconvenient. We're going to move the international dateline, which I guess they're allowed to do. So they decided one day to simply move it. It was on the 30th of December. So on one day, for one half of the country, it went from Friday the 30th of December to Sunday, the 1st of January, skipping the Saturday New Year's Eve effectively.
Right.
And that day was just gone.
Just a gone day.
Yeah, so now
Lost day in time.
Exactly. So when you look on the maps, world maps, they put the international date line. What you'll see is it's this kind of vertical line, and then suddenly it sort of stops, comes to a screeching halt, takes a 90-degree turn, travels for about 2,500 miles to the east, comes down a bit further, and then travels all the way back. So there's this kind of bite out of the international date line to enable Kiribati to be in a single day at least.
I mean, that's astonishing.
Right?
Like, it really is, isn't it? Like, when you think about, I just feel sorry for the people who live there, having to deal with all of that.
Well, it comes with advantages, because the other thing that does is it's the only place in the world that I think that you can be 14 hours behind Greenwich Mean Time, because everyone else, by the time they get that far across the globe, have skipped over the international date line. So they go back to being ahead of the Greenwich Mean Time.
Okay.
So it's where the day starts in a sort of artificial man-made time zone.
So when the millennium hit,
it was the first place to see the millennium in, and you've got a lot of film crews that went there, and news people went, look, this is the millennium. The first place you can see it is the very eastern part of Kiribati.
Very cool.
Right?
So every year on New Year's Eve, the first people to see in 2021 will be Kiribati.
Exactly. And I am just getting started, my friend, on the interesting things about this place.
How did they move the line, though? Like, that would take a lot of resources to dig it up and move it
yes,
2,000 miles away.
Because in Greenwich, obviously, it's like a brass railing, isn't it? So like, this thing is going to be a trouble. It's the undersea line that they really struggled with, I think.
That's the really tricky one. You reel it in.
Exactly. They had to tow it for 2,500 miles, and the canoes they needed was just astonishing.
Yeah.
Now you're going to want to know how big it is, I'm pretty sure.
This bit is always my favourite part of the episode.
So, in relative terms, it's the, I think, 24th smallest state.
Okay.
It weighs in at 811 square kilometres.
Weighs in?
Oh, okay, you didn't weigh it. It measures in at... you pedant. This isn't Dursley's verdict.
I'm learning from Dursley here.
Yeah, 811 square kilometres, so not a massive thing. Would you like to know how many Frances that is?
Yes, definitely.
Well, I won't say how many Frances it is. I'll say how many of these you can get into a France.
Okay.
680.
Okay. 680 Kiribatis to a France.
Yeah, that's the current exchange rate.
All right. It's quite small, isn't it?
Yeah, there's only 110,000 people. That makes it the 15th smallest state by population.
And how many islands comprise Kiribati?
There's actually 3 island groups in it, which is the Phoenix Islands, the Line Islands, and the Ellice Islands.
All right.
So I think tens of islands. I don't think thousands of islands. So it's somewhere in terms of population, somewhere between Preston and Huddersfield, if you're a UK viewer, or Clovis, California.
Oh, right.
But then this is another of these weird paradoxes of this country that is so quirky and interesting, is that it's also absolutely massive. So it has what is known as the exclusive economic zone, which is the 12th largest exclusive economic zone. And that means basically the area of sea that it has around it that it has certain rights over. So if you take its exclusive economic zone, it is nearly 3.5 million square kilometres.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's again...
How many Frances is that?
I didn't work that out in Frances.
Come on.
I have to be honest. You'll have to voice of the internet, that one.
Hello. This is the voice of the internet. France is 644,000 square kilometers in size, which means that you could fit 5 Frances in the Kiribati economic zone. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a tiny yet massive place that is on Monday, but also Tuesday.
Yeah,
it's this really quite interesting place. So I've mentioned that it's a collection of islands: Gilbert Islands, Phoenix Islands, and the Line Islands, and also the Ellice Islands.
I feel like they're sort of Harry Potter.
It does sound like houses, doesn't it?
Houses,
yeah. 10 points to Phoenix.
Yeah.
It includes what is one of or the largest coral atoll in the world, which is Kiribati Island. Or atoll. Kiribati. How do you say that?
Well, the T I wouldn't pronounce as a T because we've learned that it's Kiribati.
So in this one, you've got 2 lots of TIs. So it's Christmas Island.
Oh, okay. No way. Is that what it's called?
So yeah, Christmas Atoll or Kiribati Atoll. And a small apology to any Kiribati people out there for the mangling of your language.
They won't find out until tomorrow, so it's fine.
True. We've got time to get away. That accounts for actually about half the country's total area, just this one atoll, which is a very big atoll, which you will hear more about shortly. Other features of this place, because they're atolls, they're small, they're very low. So most of them are only a couple of meters above sea level. There is one island, as I said, proper island, called Banaba, which goes up to a solid 87 meters, which is nearly as high as Big Ben.
Yeah.
So get your crampons ready for that trip. And because these islands are very low and they're in the Pacific, they are under genuine grave threat from climate change.
Okay. Because if the water increases,
the
water
don't
level
have a lot of
increases,
spare capacity. Yes,
Right.
there's a couple of problems there. So in 1989, there was a United Nations report that suggested that this is one of the countries that could literally disappear in the 21st century as a result of climate change. So, and this is happening now. So there are villages that used to be on the land that are now offshore. And the problem isn't just that you run out of land because there's water on the land.
Yeah.
But fresh water is very precious in these areas. What happens is, as I understand it, fresh water comes in the form of rain, and it absorbs into the island, and it creates what's called lens, which is fresh water kind of floating above the salt water in the groundwater of the island.
Oh, okay.
And that
right.
can be a little bit of sea level rise can impact that, so that suddenly your fresh water is not fresh anymore.
Oh, I see. Because it gets superseded by the sea.
Yeah, so I guess it gets mixed in with the salt water in some way that makes it... So your bigger problem isn't that, oh no, there's water lapping into my living room. It's the water that I get from my well is now seawater, and now I've got a real problem.
You'd feel like that could be solved by technology, though, surely. There must be ways of desalinating the ocean water.
Well, I think the unfortunate part is that is possible... But there are still islands that are literally sinking. So
yeah, don't get me wrong. That bit is a problem. Yeah, it's going to become like the new water world. People be living on little floating rafts.
Well, yeah, it's a really serious business. It's I looked at footage obviously of some of these places, and it's just these houses that it looks like flood, but that's it. That's the new normal. There is no receding of this flood tide.
Sure. And you'd think, like, given that there is a lot of engineering work going on in places around the world, I'm thinking of Dubai and China, where they're making new islands by shifting sand from one side of the world to another. You might help the Kiribatis out.
Yeah, but these are not wealthy places either. This is a small set of atolls in the Pacific
It's easier
Island.
just to let the islands go, bring them over to somewhere else, relocate them.
Yeah, I mean, where's the oil money? I suppose is the question of the equivalent of Dubai. Who's going to pay for all this? And we'll talk about this as well actually later. So good question. Let's come back to it. So that's the where. That's just my headline of the where. This isn't even the fun and interesting detail.
I know we've got 1980 to 1985 to get through, specifics and mind and body as well.
Correct. So 1980 to 85, I'm going to orient you in the when relatively quickly because it's recent enough, so I don't think we need to go into huge detail.
Okay.
But you can identify it because this was a period in which Afghanistan had an invading force of external soldiers, so you can help you distinguish it from other time periods.
I mean, I distinguish it by the fact that I was between the ages of 0 and 6.
Yeah, you were younger than I was. But yeah, the Soviets are in Afghanistan at this point. So not Americans there, they're Soviets. But poor Afghanistan still had people visiting in an unwelcome fashion. The Soviet Union, as I say, still exists. It's Cold War period. Mm-hmm. Ronald Reagan is president in 1980. Margaret Thatcher is our prime minister. We're talking about the period of the Falklands War and the miners' strike in the UK. But for people who that doesn't mean anything to, Pac-Man's been introduced in the arcades. In 1984, the Motorola Dynatac 8000X is released, and that is the first commercially available mobile phone.
Yeah, that was my favourite.
I have a picture of it here. It's about the size of a medium to large size Bible, about the size of a very small dog, maybe a Chihuahua. If you were to hold a Chihuahua to your ear, that's roughly the size of the Motorola Dynatac 8000X.
Okay. I picture like the first mobile phone to be like in a suitcase or something, and you had to
Well, I suppose I should say mobile as distinct from car phone, because there were car phones, which you might argue to be mobile phones, but this is your first swagger around with your
pocket
dictionary-sized phone. It's 4 years before Tim Berners-Lee develops his technology that will become the internet.
Amazing. That's astonishing, isn't it? When you consider the impact of the internet, and it was just so recent.
This show would have been quite dull in this period, as we each week we came together and say, "What did you find?" And you say,
"I went to the library."
Not much, really. There was like one book.
The book I wanted was out. And somebody else had it and brought it back on time.
Exactly. So, yeah, that wouldn't have been a podcast for the masses. But, of course, that would be fine because no one would have been on the internet to listen to it.
Well, we'd have done a pirate radio, right?
We'd have been radio
sitting in a shed in a garden somewhere, pirating this podcast.
Perfect. Musically, Dexy's been the right runners. Come On Eileen. Spandau Ballet, True. All that kind of good pop, shoulder pads, big hair, the stuff. Films and TV, Miami Vice and the A-Team, that kind of thing.
Okay.
The 80s.
Kiribati in the 80s. Kiribati in the 80s, and you've got big hair with shoulders out to here. Poison round your neck. Rubik's Cube with He-Man on the television set. Maybe you'd better go and see a movie. Indiana Jones, don't forget your Teddy Ruxpin and your Cabbage Patch too.
So now I'm going to zoom in a little bit to Kiribati. I know we've talked about it quite a lot actually already, but that was just where it was, right? Now I'm going to talk a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of the history of Kiribati, and I've got to do a shout-out here to Michael Walsh, the author of A History of Kiribati.
Okay.
I would argue it's the history of Kiribati. I couldn't find a huge number of other books about it, but this was... I was slightly nervous because I actually got in touch with him. He's a lovely man.
Great.
Who gave me some helpful advice and also said, you should buy my book. This will tend to make me nervous when someone says that. Yeah. So with some trepidation, I purchased said book and it was an absolutely fascinating romp, I have to say.
Nice.
So that's where a great deal of what you're about to hear comes from.
Oh, well, thank you very much. What was his name again?
Michael Walsh.
Michael, thank you very much for all your support.
He is in fact the honorary consul for Kiribati.
Oh, what does that mean?
That means he will stamp your visa when you want to go visit.
No way, really?
I don't think it's a full-time job.
Right.
But he was very helpful, I have to say.
Yeah, I wonder how many people make it all the way over there.
Well, there are a few because I also got a lot of help from the Kiribati Tungaru Association, a Facebook group particularly, who gave me some pointers and some ideas of where to look. And they were very helpful. So there are clearly people who have fond associations with the country. So there are people being exchanged over there for sure.
Very good.
Right, so let's go way, way back. This is small islands bobbing about in the Pacific Ocean. Some Austronesian people arrive, probably from the Solomon Islands, about 3000 BC, maybe 1000 BC, we're not quite sure. Described by Arthur Grimble, which is a name to conjure with, as small, black-skinned, large-eared, flat-nosed, and much addicted to magic.
He's not holding anything back there, is he?
He's really not. And I think he is to some extent making it up as well. I think this is based on kind of oral histories again. So I don't think he has excavated a small, black-skinned, large-eared, flat-nosed person who is clearly shooting up magic. Yeah. He's just heard stories about the history of the peoples of the area, I think.
I mean, to be fair, who's not interested in magic?
I know, right? You wouldn't say, no, I'll put down the wand, Ryan.
Bunch of flowers? No, I'm not interested.
I suppose. Every time you sneeze, like, no, please, Ryan, don't do it. Out come the hankies. So then there's subsequent invasions by Samoans and Tongans, and they bring Polynesian elements to the Micronesian culture.
Okay.
And then some Fijians introduced some Melanesian elements, and essentially I saw a map of the kind of movements of people, and it looks very much like the opening to Dad's Army with just arrows coming in from all directions. So I think it's a bit of a melange of migrations leading to this tribe and these people in Kiribati. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what I would call old Kiribati, but I do have to share something I found, which was a picture of a Kiribati warrior.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly when he was from, but it was spear type warrior rather than gun type warrior. But it was a photograph. Right. So
Okay.
That'll orient you roughly where we are. So this guy had coconut fiber armor. So he had kind of looks like bark almost on his breastplate, and he's got sort of leg coverings.
Honestly, if someone tried to sell me a coconut fiber ballistic vest, I'd totally believe that was a modern thing.
Yeah, it's kind of strong and spongy, isn't it? You'd think it could absorb a lot of
and
impact.
light as well, I imagine.
Yeah. I think I'd give it a go. And he also he has a spear, but not just a spear. This spear is a shark tooth spear.
Oh,
it's got all this row of shark teeth embedded in it, and it looks pretty terrifying. But all of that pales into insignificance compared to the headgear, because he's wearing on his head a puffer fish.
Oh, no way.
So imagine a puffer fish, the blue that puff up.
I was going to say,
and they have all the spines.
It's puffed, right?
Right,
as opposed to the tiny
it's
thin
puffed,
one.
and he's wearing it as a hat. It's amazing.
But it's dead.
Oh yeah, it's dead. He's not wearing a live puffer fish, although that would probably cause one to puff up.
How do you keep it puffed?
So I think they puffed it and dried it out. Puffed. So once it's puffed and you dry it out puffed, it doesn't then.
So it's not like a balloon.
Retract.
You sort of blow into
I don't
it
think
and then
so.
tie its lips up.
Possibly. I mean, maybe they did various different shapes. Maybe they did a sort of poodle helmet. I don't know.
Amazing.
But yeah, it looks simultaneously so sensible and so exotic. It's almost as if it's something you would come across in a video game where someone had a thought about, well, imagine an aquatic culture. What would their warriors look like? Well, they've had sharks' teeth and pufferfish. They're kind of scary looking.
No one's thinking pufferfish hats. No one's thinking that.
Well, someone did, and I'm blooming glad they did, because it looks absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I wonder how it holds up against a shark-toothed spear being swung at you.
I think, I can't remember if I'm just making this up or I read it, but I think they were more ceremonial and for the appearance than protective.
Okay. I could buy that.
I think so, because pufferfish aren't armoured fish, are they? They're spiny, and you wouldn't want to be head-butted. But
no, but if it's dried, that's got a roughness to it, isn't it? Yeah, it's got like a thickness.
But yes, I encourage anyone to Google Kiribati warrior and check this guy out, because he looks absolutely awesome.
Okay.
So these guys are living, and as we come across frequently, we don't really know a huge amount about it because of the lack of written records. But then the West starts to arrive, as it is prone to doing.
Hooray!
And now have a quick guess who arrives first.
Portuguese.
Correct. The Portuguese arrive, as they are prone to doing in these areas.
They always get there first.
They were quite agile around the world, weren't they?
Sure.
And British ships come around. So from the 1600s, there were ships kind of passing by. They're not being landed on particularly.
I mean, if you didn't know they were there, it would be hard to stumble upon, right? That's a big area of water to just...
Yeah, there's a lot of space there. But so there are records, though, of these people passing by. They didn't tend to land because the natives would try and kill them.
Okay.
Which is fair enough.
Yeah, it really is.
So really you've got aquatic drive-bys, I'd call them.
Okay.
And then in the 1800s, you start seeing a lot more traffic because of whaling. So suddenly there's loads of whalers driving around, but then again, they also don't tend to stop due to the rather hostile reception they get.
Yeah. I wonder how many people were left on islands. These ships would be traveling around, and then anyone who was punished, they'd be thrown overboard, or they were left on an island.
Yeah, it depends on the islands, doesn't it? So famously, the crew of the Bounty stopped in Pitcairn Island, and the descendants are there to this day, aren't they? So
yes, they are.
I can't imagine that was the only time something like that happened.
No, I'm sure.
And I can also imagine being kind of fed up with ship life, landing on an idyllic paradise where hopefully they're not trying to kill you, and thinking,
I'm not getting back on that boat.
This is better than that whole boat experience.
Yeah. Well, the guy that inspired Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, I believe that was what happened to him. He was left on an island, and then another ship came around a few years later and brought him back to London, and he was sort of wheeled around as being a guy who survived on a tropical island.
Wow, I can imagine him kind of saying, well, when you say rescued, I was doing okay, actually. I was quite happy. And now you've brought me back here to my 9 to 5. I like to think of it as almost entirely idyllic.
Castaways.
Exactly.
I'll give it a go.
So, whalers are hanging around. They're fomenting trouble between the islands. I'm not exactly sure why, but apparently the islands start fighting amongst each other a little bit more than they had been previously. So in 1892, the Gilbert Islands and the neighbouring Ellice Islands were declared a British protectorate. So that's not quite a colony. So you are your own country, but you are protected by, inverted commas, Britain in this case.
That sounds an awful lot like the mafia.
Doesn't it though? That was exactly my thought. So in return for protection, that was the protectorate situation. But then things are going to change because in the 1890s, early 1900s, they discover on one of the islands, Banaba Island, which I mentioned before, they discover phosphate.
Okay.
So phosphate is used for fertilizer and has value. And as we know, the colonial situation, as soon as there's something valuable to be had, suddenly things start to change. There are now industrial needs, agricultural industrial needs, and phosphate fit the bill.
Yeah.
So now there's something valuable to be had. So surprise, surprise, things start to change. A company called the Pacific Phosphate Company applies for mining rights, and they basically lie about the value of phosphate. And they come back to Britain and say, we would like to get the rights to dig up phosphate from this island for next to nothing, please. And the government says, well, how much is it worth? And they say, oh, not much. No, nothing at all, really. And they say, okay, well, in that case, we'll give it to you for next to nothing because you're not going to make that much profit, are you?
Right.
Needless to say, they then took the phosphate to Australia and made a shed load of money. This was exposed, in fact. This was so egregious that New Age magazine in 1913 wrote an expose about it called Modern Buccaneers in the West Pacific. And it says, these phosphates, many tens of millions sterling in value, were presented by the Colonial Office, so the British government office, as a free gift to an influential company, some of whose members had held high positions in the Colonial Office service. An age-old tale of corruption and the withdrawal of valuable resources from a colony. Well, it's not even a colony at this point, but it does become a colony for not unrelated reasons.
I think I read that. That was New Age magazine, right?
Yeah. I know you're a subscriber, aren't you?
I am, yeah. That was the edition that came out with how to tie-dye a T-shirt, and I think it came with a free whale song CD.
Exactly, yes. And it had there was a Crystals for Healing episode there as well, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, they've been going for a long time. 1913, that was. 1916, it becomes a colony, so full rule now applied, directly governed by Britain as a colony. And just to take a slight diversion, generally speaking, we've seen in the colonies a certain amount of hostility between the colonizer and the colonizee.
Uprisings and such.
It doesn't seem to have been like that here. They kind of rubbed along all right together. I think partially because there was nothing that valuable there.
Right.
But it would seem that the Kiribati culture kind of divided things into two things. It was Te Mayu, again, apologies to real Kiribati people out there, Te Mayu ni Kiribati and Te Mayu ni Matang. And those are things that are the Kiribati way of life and things that are actually about Europeans, so you don't really need to worry too much about it.
Nice.
So these people kind of rubbed along okay, actually, weirdly. And there's a really nice exchange in the book I was reading that kind of sums that up, and I'm going to just read it to you because I think it's a nice summing up of this cordial colonial situation. And this is two Kiribati people talking together. Strange people, aren't they, these Imatang, or Imatang, so these foreigners, these British people. The other guy says, well, what makes you say that? He says, well, they're so clever and so helpless. They can put you to sleep and cut your body open and you live. And they have these little talking boxes and you can hear voices from miles across the ocean. But what good does it do them? They're rotten fishermen. They can't cut a coconut palm to cut toddy and get nuts. And if they lived here alone, they'd be dead in no time. So they kind of pitied these helpless colonizers at the same time as being colonized by them.
Yeah, it's quite sweet.
So it's a curious little relationship they've got going there.
It does give you an insight, doesn't it, into the relationship between them. You got to wonder if you're posted in Kiribati at that point. It's so very far away from home. I guess you get into the swing of it.
Yeah, the book I was reading kind of implied that it's sufficiently small that you don't get to live the life of a colonial overlord because there's you and maybe a couple of other administrators, and then there's the population.
Right.
So if you kind of try and go lording it around the place, you're not going to last very long because if you don't have good relations with the local people, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And likewise, I understand that a lot of these colonial administrators kind of prided themselves on not carrying guns around the place because the relationship was different to how you might find it in different colonies.
I can't believe they didn't take some element of military with them, though, like a presence of some force.
No, I don't. I didn't
Just
see
as
they did.
administrative
I mean,
force.
right in Kiribati folk, if I'm wrong, but I didn't see that there was an army or a force there, because each island isn't that big either. Where would you put this army? And it's this whole island's chain spread out over thousands of miles.
Well, there is that. Yeah, I guess so.
So it's kind of a question of where would you put them and what would you even do with them?
Well, you'd use them in case you get attacked by pufferfish wearing shark's tooth wielding.
Always a worry.
Warriors.
Always a worry.
That was a mouthful. I couldn't quite get my head around all of those different ingredients.
Yeah, so things kind of bottle along for a while. 1919 Christmas, Ireland is added to the colony. And this is kind of a tale of Kiribati as a nation that is sellotaped together from different island chains that actually have their own identity as well. So Kiribati is not necessarily clearly a place. It's an amalgamation of lots of different islands and cultures.
Yeah.
So 1930, something interesting happened. The colonial administrator introduced something known as the Regulations for the Good Order and Cleanliness of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands. So that's a new set of not quite laws, but rules for living. And apparently, about half of these, the Kiribati locals kind of went, okay, well, we'll call that, they're good things. We'll do those and we'll incorporate those into that division I was saying earlier, things that are Kiribati and things that are European. So about half of them were like, yeah, that's good rules. We'll adopt them into our way of life. And the others were just more European rules that are there to be tolerated, but not worried about too much. So if you broke the rules, you would be fined by the government, the colonial government, but your neighbours really didn't care that you'd done these things because they were foreign affairs, not Kiribati affairs. And in fact, you would be fined, but most people didn't have any money to pay fines. Money was kind of an alien concept before the colonialists came along. So people would go to prison instead of pay fines. And apparently imprisonment also carried no social stigma at all. Nobody really cared if you went to prison. And some people found it something of a holiday from island living, which was quite challenging, I guess. And Michael Walsh's book tells this tale in the 1940s. There was a prisoner who'd been imprisoned for not paying their fine. Turned out to be not the person at all. It was somebody else. And they said, well, look, what happened is my friend was kind of busy, so I volunteered to go to prison on their behalf.
Oh, nice.
So essentially it was just kind of minor inconvenience of life of going to prison every now and then because you broke a law that was European law, which is quite different to I've done something that is against the Kiribati code, which obviously then you get the opprobrium of your neighbours.
Yeah, okay.
So fun times. They're kind of living this weird life of mixed colonial and Kiribati living, putting up with each other reasonably well from the looks of it. 1937, the Phoenix Islands get added to the pot, so more islands get brought into the nation, if you like. But this is where the US come in. They dispute that, and they want that island because it has guano on it. That is used as well as for fertilizer as saltpeter for gunpowder.
And guano, we should be clear, is seabird poop.
It is poo. It's seabird poo indeed.
Or bat poop.
Yes, so I'm guessing seabird in these instances, but yes, absolutely. So this guano or poo is used for gunpowder, and we are in 1937 at this point, so 2 years away from World War II breaking out. So you can imagine that the US is quite keen on that.
And not long after the First World War, where global shortages, I'm sure, of gunpowder.
Yeah, everyone kind of sees the need to have some gunpowder and stocks to make gunpowder with. Mm-hmm. So that brings us quite neatly into World War II. The Japanese show up. They invade the Gilbert Islands in December 1941. That's just 2 days after Pearl Harbor. And then you've got the war in the Pacific. So the Americans show up because obviously they are the main actors in the theatre. There is a terrible battle in 1943, the Battle of Tarawa. It is Tarawa Atoll in the Gilbert Islands. In that, nearly 6,500 people across Japanese, Koreans and Americans died in 3 days.
Okay, wow.
This is some of the bloodiest fighting in the Pacific, and it's actually something of a turning point in the war as well. So really quite grim experience for the island there. But obviously, hopefully, as you know, that Japan loses the war, America wins. And post-World War II, you have the United Nations being set up. And kind of globally, there's this whole long, slow process of decolonialism.
Mm-hmm. Which is still ongoing today.
Still ongoing today, absolutely. So what you'll start to see is the rules relaxing essentially, and more self-determination of the parts of these areas of the world. But that doesn't stop them in 1957 and 62 in Christmas Island, using it to test nuclear weapons.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so
that's where I know the words atoll.
Yes, Bikini Atoll.
Bikini Atoll is where
exactly.
they did a lot of the atomic bomb testing, right?
Exactly. So they then decided to do some on Christmas Island. Apparently there were 260 Gilbertese living on the island at the time, but that didn't put them off.
Wait, what?
Yeah, exactly. But don't worry, the British gave them, and I quote from the book, blankets and eye protection.
What, and then set off a bomb?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I also quote from the book, blankets and eye protection, but not enough for everyone.
I'm laughing because that's just ridiculous.
It's shocking, isn't it?
Why wouldn't you just move them off the island if you absolutely had to do it?
Well, I think...
It's not like there's many of them.
I guess to be sympathetic to some extent, I don't think anybody... Well, no. I don't think it was generally known of the hazards of fallout and radiation at that time. I think it was roughly in this period where in Las Vegas, they would have bomb viewing parties and have people watch nuclear weapons go off. Nuclear bombs go off in the desert without any, again, wearing just sunglasses and a sun
blanket,
hat.
Apparently.
Yeah, pretty much. So I guess to some extent, I'm not sure how much they knew that this would be as toxic as it actually turned out to be. But certainly you would hope you would at least get a blanket each, but they failed even in that simple task.
It seems if you're a native, be wary of anyone from the West bringing you a blanket. In history, blankets seem to have a terrible connotation.
It rarely ends well, does it?
Either riddled with smallpox or you're about to get blasted with an A-bomb. Don't accept the blanket.
Good advice for native islanders everywhere. So there's moves towards independence now. Self-determination first, then moving to independence. The Gilbert Islands want to become independent. The Ellice Islands also want to. But then there's the big question of should we be one country? Do we all want to be our own country? I will quote you something that Alec Douglas Home, the Foreign Secretary, said about these people insisting on being separate countries. The cost is deplorable, and I think we should say that if they must go their silly ways, they must bear much more of the charge. Anyway, the Bannerman Island people then also start saying, well, we want to be a country too.
Yeah.
And I'm not exactly sure how it all ends well, but it does all end well, and everyone decides to become Kiribati in 1979.
Cool.
So 1979, they have independence, and the Kiribati head of state was a guy called Jeremiah Tabai.
Wait, so this is 1 year before the year that you're looking at?
Yes, I'm homing in on my time zone.
Okay.
So Jeremiah Tabai was 29 years old when he becomes president of Kiribati.
Nice.
The youngest head of state in the Commonwealth.
That's amazing.
Right? 29 years old. What were you doing when you were 29 years old?
I was president of the pub.
Yeah, exactly. I was running not a country, that's for certain.
Yeah.
And now he has a challenge on his hands because do you remember all that lovely phosphate that was being sold across the world? That literally runs out. The last mine closes in 1979.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So suddenly what was your major source of income is gone just as you become independent. So they're really concerned at this time. They're writing documents that are actually questioning, is this a viable country? Can we be a country? Have we got enough resources?
Okay.
And the loss of phosphate was doubtless part of that because the loss of the phosphate instantly meant it lost 90% of its export income.
Right. Yeah, because I'm guessing, what else have you got?
Well,
fish, but you can't be fishing and transporting that however many thousands of miles to the nearest.
So fish, yes. But get this, this really surprised me. Stamps.
I mean, what about stamps?
Philately was, in 1979, the fourth largest source of government revenue.
Isn't he the Irish dancer?
Michael Philately is just stamping his stamping, isn't he?
Yeah, literally, on his feet.
Oh, it all makes sense now. Excuse me, sir, do you have a moment?
Of course, Jones. How can I help?
Well, there's been an incident.
Oh, no.
You are aware, of course, of our latest stamp range.
Oh, yes, the stamps that say nice things about the cat hotels on the island.
That's right. And you remember we're promoting them by hiring the world's famous Irish dancer?
Yes, the Lord of the Dance.
Yes, well, he was visiting the manufacturing facility and I'm afraid he was attacked.
Oh, no. Well, you're saying there's been a Flattery battery at the Cattery Flattery Philately factory?
That's right, sir.
Well, why didn't you just say so?
Yeah, make $500,000 Australian dollars a year on stamps. And I guess to some extent, it's not just people sending letters, but people collecting stamps. So you issue stamps and then collectors around the world go, oh, I want a stamp from every country.
Okay.
So they're all buying your stamps without then sending any letters.
They don't cost very much, though, do they? A stamp?
Well, $500,000 Australian dollars isn't that much money either. But if you're a small set of atolls in the Pacific, how much money do you need to run?
Look, any money, right?
So, yeah, I mean, it says something that stamps are your fourth most significant source of income. But they do also have, as you say, fish. They still have the exclusive economic zone, that millions of square miles of sea, or ocean rather. And that has got something in it, which is worth a lot of money. Let's see if you can guess what this is. It's worth a lot of money. It's found in the sea, and it's frequently followed by an unwelcome influx of Americans.
Lack of democracy? The need for freedom?
No, I was fishing for oil there, just to trick you.
I was going to go for Krispy Kremes.
Yes, no, there's not oil either. But there are fish. Specifically, there are tuna.
Yeah, okay. They're big, aren't they, tuna?
Tuna are big old fellas, and this takes us, quite neatly, I think, into 1980. I'm in my time zone.
Out of time, I'm in my time zone. Look at me, baby, see how much I have grown. I spent my days walking up and down the sandy shore. Coconut trees are my candy store. I don't want to be anywhere else in the world. I'm a shark-toothed spear waiting to be hurled. I'm out of time, but I'm in my time zone. I'm out of time, I'm in my time zone.
Okay, so now we're talking mind and body in 1980 to 1985. And what I'm specifically talking about is strength of mind in the face of overwhelming odds.
Wow, love it.
Right? It's a bit of a weak link, but I make no apology because this is an interesting story.
Okay.
So we've got the economic zone. We've got fish in the economic zone, and that is worth some money. So the Japanese are paying less than $1 million Australian dollars for their license to fish. So other countries now will pay money to buy a license to fish in your waters.
Sure.
And that is a significant source of income. So our man Jeremiah decides that this $1 million is not enough. So he decides he's going to be forceful and uncompromising, quote, in their negotiations.
Okay.
So in 1980, he just says to the Japanese, no, I'm not going to, he's not giving us enough money. And there's a bit of a tense moment as they go, what's going to happen? But in 1981, the Japanese come back and almost double their payment.
So $2 million.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's a little bit of strength of mind. It takes a bit of courage to say
it
no.
It takes an angry young man sometimes to stand up.
A 29-year-old with some steel is what we're getting here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what stops the Japanese just being like, well, you're a tiny little series of islands, like, we're just going to do it anyway. What are you going to do? How are you going to stop us?
I'm glad you asked that question because we are about to find out.
Cool.
So as you ask, what do you do when some villainous character comes along and says, well, I'm going to ignore your licensing? Well, we find out because there is a villain, and that villain is, would you care to guess?
The Japanese.
Incorrect. It's the United States.
Huh?
So America, and specifically, there is an organization called the ATA, which is the American Tuna Boat Association.
So the ATBA.
Right. These guys basically are running around doing what the hell they want. And this comes from a thing called the 1976 Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act in the US. I know you're interested in the minutiae of American legislation. But this is important because this basically says, as a nation, they are not going to pay any attention to any claim of sovereignty over resources that apply to highly migratory species. So to put that in language that I understood when I had to read this about 5 times, basically, because tuna swim around a lot, it didn't count that they were in the Kiribati economic zone.
Okay. Well, no, I can see that.
I'm not so sure. I think that's like chasing a deer up from the USA and it goes into Canada and you go, well, it doesn't just live in Canada, so I'm going to just go into Canada. It's a pretty invasive thing to do, I think.
So if the tuna does swim elsewhere, why don't they just catch it there? Why do they have to catch it in Kiribati?
Precisely so. So this is why I think it's a weak argument. They don't say we can catch tuna anywhere because it leaves your area. They say we can come into your area because your tuna sometimes goes out of it, which seems pretty poor to me.
A little bit of legalese.
Yeah, quite so. So the American...
A bit of wrangling.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's worse than that because the American Tuna Boat Association doesn't even respect the rules as applied. So they're supposed to leave a 12-kilometre zone outside actual islands. That much the legislation did recognise. But they just ignore that. They start landing helicopters on islands without asking anyone. And there's one vessel, an ATA tuna vessel called the Carol Linda, which, now bear in mind you're supposed to be 12 kilometres offshore in order to respect this distance. It's managed to run aground.
Okay.
So they are clearly not 12 kilometres offshore. Kiribati, on this specific instance, are pretty upset, and they make a formal protest to the United States.
Okay.
The United States says...
and?
Nothing. They don't even acknowledge it.
Don't even acknowledge it. Okay.
So this is quite frustrating to your average Kiribati. And in fact, it was frustrating just reading about it. I had sort of displaced anger for the Kiribati people.
How are they catching tuna with a helicopter, by the way?
They scout the tuna with a helicopter. So they look around for shoals. I assume they travel in shoals.
Yeah, I guess so.
And they direct the boats.
No
so
way.
they don't just
That
fly
makes
down
sense.
and grab the tuna, toss them into a helicopter, although I would pay good money to see that.
No, I had images of them sitting on the sides of the helicopter with a gun and just being like, shooting them like, I don't know, herd of buffalo or something.
I've now got an image of a kind of Huey helicopter from Vietnam era with a guy machine gunner coming out the side. Yes, I also want to see that. The tuna probably not so keen. A little quote from the director of the South Pacific Forum Fisheries Agency in 85 speaks of the American Tuna Boat Association. It's Wild West stuff. They take what they want and to hell with the rights and aspirations of anyone else.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So who do you turn to in the mid-80s when America is misbehaving?
Christopher Reeve, Superman.
Not far off, actually, because I think they took their inspiration from another 1985 film, Rocky IV.
They turned to Sylvester Stallone?
Not quite. Sylvester Stallone famously is American.
I have no idea where you're going with this.
Rocky IV.
Yeah.
Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah.
Fights who?
The Dolph Lundgren?
Dolph Lundgren, who is from?
Russia.
Soviet Union.
Wait,
so you're in the middle of the Cold War. America's pissing you off. What do? You go to the Soviet Union.
You go to Russia. Okay.
Really the only game in town in a Cold War scenario. So I'm not saying that they were inspired by the Rocky films to negotiate with the Soviet Union, but that's the order of events.
That feels like a huge escalation, though, given the relationship that was happening between the Americans and the Russians at the time.
Doesn't it, though? And then guess what happens? America starts paying attention. So negotiations between Kiribati and the USSR start in 1985.
Not that I'm a proponent for colonization, but do you think 1 year after having just gained your independence, and then all this is happening, you might be a little bit like, it'd be quite handy to have the Brits hanging around right now?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Right? Like, I mean, you would think rather than having to go to the Russians, we just literally just let one empire go.
But the alternative, I suppose, is your freedom. So what price freedom, one might ask.
Very good point.
So they start negotiating with the Soviet Union and they have an agreement. They start negotiating in Singapore. They have meetings in Manila. They basically do a tour of the area, negotiating. And they finally decide to agree to allow the Soviet Union to deploy 16 fishing vessels and one factory ship into the economic zone for 1 year, starting in 1985. So this came with a few conditions. All the ships were individually licensed. They weren't allowed within the 12-mile zone. The Soviets had to acknowledge Kiribati's sovereignty. So none of that sort of thin end of the wedge, we're going to be your new masters. All of these provisions were pretty normal for agreements at the time.
But why would you trust them?
Because the people you would normally trust in normal good guy, bad guy scenario are the very people storming around your economic area, robbing your fish.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
And all of these fairly standard clauses were things that the American Tuna Boat Association refused to accept. They wouldn't do any of these things. So quite simply, they're getting a better deal. Now, part of what they might have been interested in is that the Soviets didn't have a presence in the Pacific at this time. So you can see the appeal. Now, you can also see why this is making the Americans very nervous. So the Americans get nervous, and when Americans get nervous, Australians and New Zealanders get nervous as well.
Why?
Because they're all allies in the sort of NATO, in the Cold War. There's the Western powers and the Eastern powers, and Australia and New Zealand are aligned with the West.
Okay.
So everyone starts applying diplomatic pressure to Kiribati, this small, tiny little 100,000 people set of atolls. You've got the USA, Australia and New Zealand all come in heavy on them. So the Pentagon makes it clear that the US military is now much more interested in the Pacific as a result of this activity.
See, this is the thing, right? Like, you've now escalated it to the point where you've got their attention, but you've also, rattled the lion's cage.
Right? Absolutely. And guess what? The Americans start saying that any agreement would not be in Kiribati's long-term interest.
Yeah.
Now, if that's not a sort of nice group of atolls you got here, it would be a shame if anything happened to them. I don't know what is.
I mean, they've already given them a good bombing. Like, what more are they going to do?
So Australia, meanwhile, they took a different approach. Bob Hawke was the Prime Minister at the time. And he offered the Kiribati people Australian aid equivalent to the value of the fishing contract. So he had tried a bit of a bribey, here's a check for not marrying my daughter kind of approach.
Okay, right.
And then New Zealand tried another approach as well, which was, well, not quite another approach. They said it was like everyone did, it's the sort of thin end of a Soviet wedge, and it would end up with Soviets in the region, which nobody wanted. But it was pointed out that at that time, New Zealand had their own fishing arrangement with the Soviets, and they had the brass neck to then say that basically it was all right for New Zealand because they had the wherewithal to repel the Soviet Union. Specifically, the quote says, "It is not my view that smaller island states have the means that we have to preserve their interests." So I don't know what New Zealand military might he's got in mind to repel the Soviet Union, but he obviously thinks there's a significant difference there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on the size of the Soviet Union that is present there.
Yes, but I guess for me, the difference between Kiribati holding off the Soviet Union and New Zealand is not massive unless they've got orcs.
Well, they could use the orcs, that's true. They do have the power of Sauron to get rid of...
I suppose the magicians, having magic users on your side, wizards to deploy would probably... Maybe that's what he was referring to.
Yeah.
He's going to just send Gandalf the Grey on them. So anyway, our man Tobias, the Prime Minister, basically says, no, I don't care. He says, the main concern I see is that we are so poor that we will allow the Soviets to establish a base in Kiribati.
Okay.
Well, we are not so poor as to lack principles. We are not pro-Russian, we're pro-Kiribati, and we believe in our capacity to pursue our national interests to achieve self-reliance.
Oh, but the Russians were loving this.
Right? And I when I read that, I was like, it was kind of stirring. If I were a Kiribati person, I'd think, yeah, that's good stuff. And there's certainly a very long way to say get stuffed to everyone. Could have done it in a couple of words.
Yeah.
But actually, this whole thing was quite hotly debated in Kiribati. It was not as everyone going, yay, we're free and standing up to the man. There were a fair number of people who thought this was quite bad news as well.
Yeah.
There was a vote of no confidence in the government, which they survived. But that gives you some sense of this was not by no means a everyone stand up and cheer moment.
I wonder why, though. I wonder why they were against it.
Same as, I think don't trust the Soviets. It must have been part of it. I would be nervous if we were inviting the Soviet Union, which had a long track record of finding smaller countries and absorbing them into it. So I got some sympathy with that.
Especially if you're just so soon after having got rid of one colonist.
It does seem early to be inviting global predators into your area, doesn't it?
Yeah. Even if they are as handsome as Dolph Lundgren.
Well, yes, and a mighty fine fellow he was too. He's Danish in real life, isn't he, or something similar?
Fact check, Charlie.
Fact check, please.
Hello. This is the voice of the internet. Hans-Dolph Lundgren is an actor, filmmaker, and martial artist who was born on the 3rd of November 1957 in Spånga, Sweden. He started his career appearing in Rocky IV as the imposing boxer Ivan Drago. Since then, he has starred in more than 70 films. Thank you.
Then as it happens, after the first year, things fall apart. The negotiations with the Soviets break down and they can't agree, funnily enough, on the most mundane of things. They just couldn't agree a price. So the Minister for Natural Resources said it was just commercial. The influence of the United States, Australia and New Zealand had nothing to do with it. We were just asking for a fair price.
Okay.
How much you believe that, I don't know. I couldn't help but feel if the New Zealand, Australian and United States governments were watching my negotiations carefully, I might be a little bit influenced, I don't know. But it didn't really matter because the job was done then. The USA's noticed that these things are happening. They've realised that by allowing the American Tuna Boat Association to go roaming around, upsetting everybody, suddenly very significant global things have happened. So a subcommittee of the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee, one of the members of the committee said to the Tuna Boat Association, Your perspective is entirely commercial. The government of the United States has a perspective that's broader than that. So they kind of wake up. This is the same government, mind you, that not so long previously had just not even acknowledged the Kiribati complaints about this activity. Now they're saying, hey, tuna boat people, you don't understand. There's matters of state to worry about here. So eventually in 1987, US and Pacific negotiators agree an agreement for not just Kiribati, but a number of the Pacific states for the value of about $12 million. So fundamentally, more money comes from the US and they act in a much more reasonable manner as a result of all this palaver.
Wait, so the Americans bought islands, so they bought land?
No, they negotiated the licenses again, but more fairly, essentially. So specifically to Kiribati, they got They got $1.5 million from the Soviet Union the previous year, and in that year, that allowed them to cancel their budgetary aid from the United Kingdom. So basically, they used their money from the Soviet Union to no longer need aid from the United Kingdom, and that was a source of great pride for them as well.
Okay.
So not only do they get to pay off their debt, it was not quite a debt, but they become no longer reliant on aid.
Okay.
They've got a better deal with the United States, and basically things are looking pretty good for the Kiribati at the end of this experience. They've stood up, this tiny island nation, stood up to the Americans, the Australians, the New Zealanders. They've negotiated with the Soviet Union and then walked away again. They've kind of played both sides against each other and come out looking pretty good, I'd say.
Yeah, it makes me very nervous. That's a big game that you're playing. I'm sure the Russians didn't just go, oh, all right, well, we'll go back now. We'll leave.
Well, they pulled it off. I guess once you've had one nuclear bomb exploded on your territory, you're less afraid of more.
Yeah.
But it seems to have worked. And this all, let's not forget, by a guy who was 29, early 30s.
Yeah.
It makes my life look absolutely rubbish.
Yeah, he has a strong tenacity, doesn't he?
And strength of mind, which is part of body and mind.
I like how you stretch these.
That's the link. You got to like it, because that's all I got.
But it's interesting because if you go back to what you were saying about their approach towards the British colonists in the early 1900s, they were pretty easygoing people, looking at the foreigners with an objective eye. I wonder if that disappears over a course of maybe one or two generations, or whether or not they still had that when they're looking at the global scene as opposed to just locally.
I think that's a good question. I would be more inclined to suggest it was a matter of pragmatism in both cases, actually. So originally, when the whalers were running past the island, they were killing everyone who came ashore for various reasons relating to the culture of home ownership and identifying yourself as a real person.
Yeah.
So people who didn't own stuff were basically slaves. So from their point of view, a whaler landing on your island who couldn't prove he owned land was a slave, and so you could do what you want with them.
Yep.
So they tended to kill them. But then when the colonial actual power arrived, I think they've kind of thought, well, we can't keep killing these people. Let's learn to adjust. And I think it seems to be a tale of adjustment. So then the fishing situation arose, and they adjusted again.
Very cool. So this was all resolved between 80 and 85. When did the Russians leave?
It actually finished in 87 was the agreement with the Americans. I think it was 86. I want to say 86 when they failed to renew the agreement with the Soviet Union. So tipped over the edge of 85 there. But I didn't want to stop the story middle way.
No, right. No, quite right. No, it makes sense. Wow, amazing. How about that?
Do you want to hear about body?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got just one thing, just because I didn't think it was fair to just have mind. I was asked body and mind.
Mind and body. Yeah.
There's not a lot on these islands. They're not hugely agriculturally developed. They don't have huge amounts of topsoils, and so you don't get really great farming. And one of the main sources of vitamin C is a thing called toddy.
Okay.
Toddy
you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, I did. Yes, toddy is when you milk the sap of the flower of the coconut tree. Mm-hmm. You kind of make a cut in it, and this sap drips down the folded leaf. You fold the leaf, and it drips into a coconut shell. And twice a day, you can milk a coconut tree, apparently.
Okay.
And it creates this kind of sweet syrup called toddy, and that is one of the primary and main source, in fact, of vitamin C on the island.
So they're all drinking toddy?
Everyone is drinking toddy all the time. And you have to be careful, though. You have to drink it fresh within 12 hours.
Right.
Otherwise, it will ferment, but it doesn't ferment in the nice, let's have a nice beer way. It ferments in the methyl alcohol way, which is the you go blind and die kind of way.
Oh, super fermented.
So yeah, keep it fresh. This is relevant because I did try to get us some toddy.
Did you?
But it turns out that nobody within 12 hours of the Croydon area was able to milk a tree for me. So I'm afraid we're not able to taste it, but I'm reliably informed that it's a crucial part of life out there as a main source of vitamin C. Excuse me, sir, do you have a moment?
Ah, Jones, of course.
I'm afraid it's an incident.
Oh, no.
Do you know Roderick, who works at the coconut sap processing plant?
Roddy? Yes, of course.
Well, it seems he was working on our new product, one promoting that licensed children's character.
Oh, the one by Enid Blyton? The one who lives in Toyland and has a friend called Big Ears?
That's right, sir. He must have made an unexpectedly poor batch and drunk some of it because, well, we found him floating face down in a vat.
Oh, no, you're saying they found Roddy's body in the oddly shoddy noddy toddy?
That's right, sir.
Well, why didn't you just say so? Yeah, I'd love to try it. I mean, I wonder if it's got a coconutty taste.
Well, I'll tell you what there is. There is an equivalent drink, an equivalent
Malibu.
of toddy in Sri Lanka, and they take that and they also distill that into a drink called arak.
Okay.
And it just so happens... this is some arak from Sri Lanka, so I don't know whether there is any kind of equivalent of this on Kiribati.
Right.
But just for the fun of it, let's try a bit of, this is coconut tree sap.
It's very light. It's not got a very strong smell at all. There's definitely an alcohol-y smell to it, but it sort of smells like a liqueur rather than a spirit.
So here we go. I'm going to try it, and then I'm going to say nothing, and then you try it, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay. It's like water.
Really? Try again. Have some more.
No, I've had quite enough. Are you struggling?
I do not like that.
No, I mean, that's warmed my insides.
No, that burns.
Really?
Yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
I'm going to have more, obviously.
And this is arak.
This is arak,
which is again a coconut tree based.
Yeah, it's from the base toddy. It's then fermented and distilled. So this was as close as I could get, I'm afraid.
Well, it's pretty close, isn't it? It doesn't taste coconutty.
It doesn't really have a taste at all, other than burn.
It's just mildly spirity. Well done for bringing that in.
So, thank you. That's everything I have on... Well, actually, no, it's not. I had so much stuff that I wanted to tell you. This is just a sliver of it. So, when we roll the dice again, I will be not disappointed when we get Kiribati again.
Really? That's amazing. Because we've done a good coverage of Kiribati in the past hour. So, I've gone from a position of knowing nothing about a place to a tremendous amount.
Yeah, it's been one of the ones I've really enjoyed the most. I have to say, there was so much to learn, and it was all really, really gripping stuff. So thank you, everyone who helped.
You loved that research, didn't you?
I really did. Really enjoyed that.
This was great. I really, really enjoyed this one. There was just so much to talk about. Amazing.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
So I suppose it is your turn to see what you're going to be looking at next week. Now,
it's very much my turn.
I have a proposal for you, Ryan.
Tell me the proposal, Pete.
Next week's broadcast will be the Christmas episode. Now, I think we should hold the Durs later for the matter of the topic. Simply find a time period and a place and make the topic Christmas. What do you think?
Well, what if it's like 2000 BC?
Then you are in severe trouble.
Yeah, this is a great suggestion for you, given you don't have to do it. Yeah, no, I'm willing to give it a try. Because it's like, it can be festivities, I guess.
There's always a way.
Stretched right to Christmas.
I stretched mine quite a long way. I'm interested to see how you can stretch prehistoric Christmas.
All right, so we're not doing the topic. The topic is Christmas.
Yes.
But we are going to randomize the country and the time.
Yes. So, Ryan.
Yes, Peter.
I'm going to hit the Durs later. Here we go. And your country is... Cameroon.
Cameroon,
famously Christmassy.
Famously Christmassy. Think of all those Cameroonian Christmas movies.
Yeah, and don't worry, you'll get a you'll get. I was going to say your modern period, but you'll get 1930, which seems to be your trademark decade.
That's true.
Okay, your time period is
God,
1500 to 1600.
Okay.
In Cameroon.
At
Christmas.
A Cameroon Christmas.
Yay! I look forward very much to finding how you dig yourself out of this hole.
Okay. Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna need a Christmas miracle, mate. I'm gonna put in some sleigh bells now.
Yeah, I had them in my head.
You did as well. Yeah. Talking of Christmas, Pete and I wrote a book a few years back. It's a Christmassy book, so that's why I'm telling you. It's called Reindeer Tales, and it's available as an electronic read via Amazon Kindle. There will be a link in the description of this podcast. You can just click through that. That'll take you straight through to it. It's a collection of short stories. Well, the concept being, what if all of Santa's reindeer were once human?
It's a thoroughly enjoyable romp. You should be aware it is a work of fiction. It's a bunch of short stories. It is not history happening anywhere.
Did you say it's fiction? What if Santa's reindeer were once human?
People need to know.
Not based on fact. We want to say thank you to all the people that are out there supporting the show at the moment. We're loving the feedback that we're receiving at the moment. If you want to give us a rating or a review, you can do that at Apple Podcasts. We're not sure how you rate us or review us on the other stuff, but we are available on those. So just continue to listen to us on those, and we'll be pleased. Okay, and lastly on the list, The Verdict, our autopsy of our main podcast. It's an after-show podcast where our resident critic and reviewer, Paul Dursley, joins us to pull apart our episode and tell us what we got right and what we got wrong. All right, thank you very much, everyone. This has been... History Happened Everywhere. Thanks for listening to History Happened Everywhere. I'm Ryan and he's Pete. And if you want to get in touch with either of us, you can do that through hhepodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can use HHE Podcast in any of the usual social media.
That's right. And, you know, if you did enjoy the show and you enjoy it, let's help spread the word, get more people coming, and you can do that by rating and reviewing at your podcast provider.
We'd love to hear what you think, as long as it's nice.
Yeah, please be nice. Be nice.
We're
very sensitive. HHE HQ, Ryan speaking. How can I help?
Happy New Year!
Happy New Year. Pete, is that you?
Hello, yeah, it's me. I'm calling from 2021.
What do you mean? Where are you?
I've come to Kiribati.
Oh, because of the timeline. You're in the future.
I am in the future. I'm calling to give you some tips.
Great.
Okay, so the 330 in Doncaster, I want you to take all your money,
Yeah.
put it all on a horse called Nibbler's Joy.
Nibbler's Joy. Right, yep, okay, we'll do.
Then you take the winnings from that, you put all of that money into stocks of a company called Digicorp.
Digicorp. Right, yep, okay, got that.
Right, that's it. You're going to be a millionaire, mate.
Fantastic.
There is, I should probably warn you about one thing as well.
Yeah.
You know the episode on Kiribati?
Yeah.
Well, it goes out and, you know, there's a sketch in there near the end.
The sketch at the end, yeah.
Yeah, it does not work. People absolutely hate it.
Oh, no.
No, I know. They say it's not funny.
Right.
It's kind of laboured.
Oh, man.
They say it doesn't really have a punchline, and the worst thing they say, it just ends.